Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, wherever you are in the world, or during the day. It depends on what time you're actually listening to me. I do realise some of you do listen during the day, and I'm always saying good evening, and I apologise for that. I realise that time distances everywhere are different. But wherever you are, whatever time of the day it is, I do hope you're in incredibly well, and I send love to each and every one of you. And I just think you guys are all fantastic. And before we get started, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Geraldine and I grew up in Houston in Texas in the 80s era. A single daughter of two elderly parents who were literally old enough to be my grandparents. My mother gave birth to me at 53 years old, and at the time she believed her enlarged distended abdomen was a result of rather unfortunate menopause belly fat. But when her waistline increased exponentially beyond what was customarily considered reasonable weight gain for the menopause, she believed she had some kind of catastrophic cancerous stomach tumour. I gather she and my dad waited with bated breath in the oncologist office as she emphatically believed she had a deadly cancer and assumed the prognosis would be terminal. Imagine her immense surprise when the cancer specialist told my mother that she was actually 7 months pregnant, because that was the last thing she ever imagined happening to her. In her younger days, my father and mother had tried every conceivable fertility treatment on offer and subsequently parted with copious amounts of cash, and nothing ever worked. My parents had just given up on the possibility of having children, when quite suddenly I showed up as an unexpected, random and rather belated surprise. Looking back, my mother perceived that when she finally surrendered to the reality that she would not be able to conceive, and she simply just relaxed, she believed that the letting go changed her life. From that point on, my mother would have one motto in life alone, and it was to go with the flow and let life take you down her intended pathway without holding the reins too tightly, just to see where it would take you. Growing up with older parents did have distinct advantages, as my parents quite literally were involved in every detail of my life, and they gave me their attention, time and love, and so I can assuredly say that I really had a very happy childhood. One day in my young, vibrant life was to change everything about my future in an instant that would ultimately influence my life choices quite strikingly. I remember I was invited to my very best friend Jane's birthday party, and her mother happened to be a very well-known psychic medium who gave people readings for a handsome price all over North America. Many believed that she was onto the money as far as how painstakingly accurate her predictions always were. She seemed to know who would be the next president of the United States, and when someone famous was about to fall pregnant. I was at my very best friend's birthday party, and I had dropped my mother's brooch that I had been wearing on my creamy white satin blouse, and I knew I just had to find it, because my mother would be devastated if I lost it. I was certain it had fallen under the buffet table, so when nobody was looking, I crept under the table very surreptitiously. The table was beautifully laden with delicious trays of delectable edibles, from sausage rolls to chicken drumsticks and spicy barbecue ribs. It was laden with a very long, pristine, starched white tablecloth that literally clung to the ground, so I clambered under it, scrutinising the cream carpet for any signs of my mother's brooch, and luckily I was able to retrieve it. I was inadvertently hidden under the table when I suddenly heard my best friend's mother coming back. It appeared she was discussing me. I could hardly believe that I was actually the object of her conversation. My heart started to pump violently in my chest, and tears poured down my cheeks as I listened to her horrifying revelations about me that quite literally turned my blood as ice, as cold as ice. Any time Jane's mother had something to say, it always got my attention, because her predictions were always accurate as far as I was concerned, and I had no reason to doubt her sombre predictions for my future, or lack of future, so to speak. "Poor Geraldine," I heard her say to her friend. "The poor little mite hasn't got long to live." "How dreadfully sad," I heard another woman's voice say. "Still, that's how cruel life can be sometimes, and there's not a jot you can do about the inevitable. Still, I'm sure Jane will find a brand new friend that she likes." It's not going to be easy for poor Jane to lose her best friend. She's very attached, you know. But still, I'm sure in time she'll come to terms with it. Time can be a remarkable healer, and kids are much more resilient than adults, you know. I remember those piercing words, stung like a swarm of aggressive hornets, and the horrible predictions from Jane's mother hung over my life like an ominous black cloud, and I was never certain when that lightning bolt would strike me down. I just knew that I had to make the very best of every single moment that I had left. I realised that I was literally living on borrowed time, and so I wanted to enjoy what time I had left to the fullest. I was certain that my best friend's mother, the psychic medium, had a direct line of communication with God, and he had shared with her that I was destined to have a very short life, and that was the end of the matter. It was beyond negotiation. It was all out of my control, and there was not a thing I could do to change the road of destiny. I was certain of that fact. As a result, I made decisions for my life that did not require university degrees or any form of further education, as what was the point in wasting my energy on such fanciful pursuits when clearly I did not have much longer to live? I had no idea how I would meet my demise. Would I have a dreadful accident that would suddenly cause me to be obliterated from the world in an earth-shattering second? Or would I have a long, drawn-out, debilitating illness like a lingering cancer? I truly hoped the former would be the case, because the idea of suffering did not tickle my boat very much. Naturally, my parents were disillusioned and disenchanted that I did not want to broaden my educational horizons, so to speak. But my mother, who always lived with a go-with-the-flow mentality, encouraged me to follow my heart, and she gave me the finances to support my wild, whimsical, naive endeavours. I was so blessed because my mother was my greatest cheerleader, and her rich, sagacious life experience had made her wise to the ways of the world. All my life I had been wild, audacious and adventurous, and at school I'd always excelled in athletics and sports and loved everything to do with the great outdoors, especially wildlife. My greatest worldly yearning was solo camping, but that was something that I never shared with my parents. I also never told them that I was desirous of exploring the remote areas of North American wilderness all on my own. So I made up a fictitious character called Ben, who would be camping with me on these exciting, compelling wilderness expeditions, and that enabled my parents to physically relax as far as concerns for my safety were concerned. They were also very disappointed that they'd never got the opportunity to meet him. "Well, at least she's in expert hands," my mother would say. "We know that this wilderness expert, Ben, will guide her wisely, so I take solace from this fact. I'm sure Geraldine will be absolutely fine. She's a spirited girl, but she's incredibly sensible." "Well, I suppose that's one less thing to worry about. But I do wish she'd gone to university. She's a very bright kid, and the world is her oyster. Why does she need to go exploring like this at such a young age? I don't understand it." "It's called going with the flow, dear," said my mother. "Let her be. One day she may decide to go to university, but what's the harm of having a year or two off? It'll do her good to gain self-awareness and give her worldly advantages over her peers, which I'm sure will happen." "Maybe you're right," sighed my father in resignation. "I'm going to trust your instincts on this one." I remember thinking that my parents were so blissfully oblivious and naively unaware of the extreme gravity and graveness of my pressing plight. I did not have long to live, and so I was going to maximise what time I had left by living to the fullest life, and each day as if it was my last. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and I was camping in a remote area of natural wilderness in the Pacific Northwest. I had bought a Dodge Challenger and would drive it close to various locations near where I intended to camp, and sometimes even to the exact location of my campground, depending on parking accessibility, of course. On this occasion I was all on my own, with just my huge backpack on my back, and my heart was fluttering with excitement. I was different to other youngsters my age, who relished socialising and dating. By contrast, I enjoyed my own company, and my suppressed spirit of adventure was bubbling to the surface, ready to experience an untamed, wild escapade. I was utterly thrilled to be out on my own, surrounded by the natural world. It rarely felt like an escapism from everything and everyone, and I was in my element, enjoying and appreciating every single second of what was left of this ominously short life of mine. I was not for a moment self-piteous or even angry about my plight. What was the point of wasting valuable time on worrying about something that was completely beyond my control? One day I found a beautiful open clearing in the woods, which was so picturesque you could have been forgiven for thinking that this enchanting, poetic place belonged on the cover of a Swiss chocolate box. The sensational, exquisite views over the lush green mountainous valleys were quite literally breathtaking, and I could see in my mind's eye Maria from The Sound of Music dancing down these picturesque, magical, enchanting hills, singing "The hills are alive with the sound of music." There were meadows of pretty wild flowers, beautiful pebbly streams that meandered through the undulating valley with a very rambunctious, swift current, and there were natural formations of large rocky pools where you could swim in the crisp, clear water. It was so exquisite out here, I thought, hitching up my tent in an open clearing in the heart of the woods, surrounded by the gushing stream, natural rock pools, and exquisite waterfalls, set against the backdrop of the green hilly valleys, and it really didn't get better than this, I thought happily to myself. I prepared a fire pit by selecting some large stones for my fire, which I arranged in a round circle, and then I proceeded to boil some water to make a hot mug of sweet tea for myself. I was alone, watching the tiny squirrels darting across the meadows and racing up the trees, clearly preparing themselves in advance for the hibernation for the long months that lay ahead. They were clever creatures, I thought, always preparing for the future, never knowing what the future might have in store for them. Suddenly I noticed a male figure attired in khaki shorts and a red polo top, walking towards me hurriedly, and I remember my heart literally sank, because I thought I was out here all on my own, and I didn't want any interaction with humans. As the man came closer to my camp, I realized he was in his early 60s. His skin was weathered and heavily wrinkled, and his brown sparkling eyes appeared to be studying me curiously. Who was he, I wondered, and where on earth did he come from? I was camping out in a remote area of wilderness. How on earth had this weirdo found me, out here in the middle of nowhere, where I thought I was extremely safe? "Hello there," came the man's husky voice. "What is a young girl like you doing out on your own in the wilderness like this? It's not safe for a youngster like yourself camping out here all on your own." "I'm not on my own," I lied. "My boyfriend is out here with me, and he's a very keen hunter," I said, secretly hoping that mentioning my pretend boyfriend's hunting prowess might just intimidate the stranger. "I'm relieved to hear that," said the man, "because there have been a lot of people going missing in strange, unforeseen circumstances in this area, and I'm glad to know you're not all on your own. That boyfriend of yours is a very lucky man." I watched the man walking away, and I breathed a huge sigh of relief. "Creep," I thought to myself. "Why do you not just leave me alone? What I do out here is my business and has absolutely nothing to do with you, nosy Parker." That evening I went for a lovely swim in the natural rock pool and luxuriated in the gloriously cool fresh water. Then I prepared a delicious freeze-dried meal of creamy chicken and pasta under the light of the starry night and full moon. It was such a sensational evening, and I felt incredibly, deliriously happy in the peace and solitude of the cessation of the day. I could hear the sounds of crickets and frogs and the distant calls of coyotes, and I felt incredibly snug and congenial in this enchanting world. I decided to retire to my sleeping bag early that night, but I was suddenly awoken to the sounds of twigs snapping, and I was absolutely certain that someone was in my camp, snooping around. I could distinctly hear the very clear sounds of footsteps, and I was certain it was that creepy man that I'd seen earlier in the day. I peeked out of my tent, and sure enough, at 3 a.m. in the morning, I kid you not, I could see that awful man that I had observed earlier in the day wandering around my camp and studying my swimming costume that was hanging on a tree branch drying. This man was not right in the head, I thought to myself in horror. What on earth was he doing in my camp at this time of the night? His invasive, sneaking actions reeked of nefarious, unspeakable motives that left me feeling very on edge. The question is, what should I do about it? Because I was literally in the middle of nowhere, and I could hardly call anyone for help. I grabbed my rifle and clutched it tightly, wondering whether I should confront the man or just let sleeping dogs lie. I could see he was leaving my campsite as quietly as he possibly could, trying to be as soundless as possible so as to not awaken me. I was far from happy about the precarious situation I have found myself in. I knew that in the morning I'd move further up the stream, hopefully as far away from this objectionable man as I could possibly get, and so that's exactly what I did. But no sooner had I settled into my new camping site, about a 6-hour, very exhausting, strenuous hike, I might tell you, from my previous position, there he was again, like a nagging, unrelenting mosquito that you simply could not eliminate, no matter how hard you tried to squat it. "Hello there," he said, coming up to my tent, much to my extreme annoyance. "I see you've moved further upstream. That's quite some hike for a youngster like yourself. You must be very fit. That was a good 6 hours, I'd say." "Thank you," I said. "I am very fit." "Where is that boyfriend of yours?" asked the man, raising a quizzical eyebrow at me. "Oh, he's out hunting," I lied. "But he'll be back very shortly." The man grinned at me broadly. "It does seem that your spurious boyfriend really enjoys the hunt," he said with a note of sarcasm in his voice. "Every time I encounter you, he is never around. I do look forward to finally meeting him sometime." My face flushed bright red. "Do you mind?" I said. "I need to get on with preparing our camp." "You're in the middle of the sticks, love," said the man. "There's no need to rush anything when you live out here, as life has a pace all of its own." "Jokes aside," said the man, looking at me with a grave expression, "I am concerned for your safety, young lady. I assure you that you do not want to be camping out here all on your own. It's not safe for a young girl like yourself. I told you there are many young people that go missing from these parts, never to be seen or heard from ever again." "I told you," I said. "I'm not alone. My boyfriend—" "Your boyfriend," said the man, finishing my sentence. "You're not a good liar, are you?" he laughed. "There is no boyfriend, is there? The signs are everywhere. One swimming costume hanging on a branch, one pair of shoes outside your camp, and a relatively small tent that I think would be a tight squeeze for a couple, in the best of times." "All right," I said. "My boyfriend isn't here. I lied. Big deal. But I do have a Remington rifle to defend myself with, so I'm armed and extremely dangerous." The man looked at me again hesitantly, as if he wanted to say something, but suddenly refrained from doing so. "There are things out there," he said, "that you cannot shoot, because it would only antagonize the situation and make the predator even more savagely murderous." "I think my rifle can pretty much handle anything that crosses my path," I assured him. "I did my research before I came camping, and I know exactly what to expect in the event of a bear attack or a mountain lion." "Is that all you think you have to deal with out here? I wonder how many of those missing cases around here thought that their guns would also protect them from so-called predators, but sadly to no avail. Where are they now, I wonder?" "You've lost me," I said. "What on earth are you talking about? How do you know so much about all these missing cases anyway?" "Because I was in the force," said the man, "and I've been investigating these missing cases for many long years, and there is something about those woods and something in those woods that has been killing people out there. I've seen it myself, and it's a gargantuan monster. You need to be very careful, because that thing is around." "Don't worry about me," I assured him. "I've not got long to live anyway, so I doubt I need to concern myself with monsters." "Oh, my word," said the man. "I had no idea. You don't look at all sick. I suppose I get it now, why a young, pretty girl like you is out here solo camping. It kind of makes sense to me now. How long have you got left, if you don't mind me asking?" "Good question," I said. "I have absolutely no idea." "Well, maybe that's for the best," he said in a gentle tone of voice. "Even so, you do need to be careful out here. There are things in those woods that are very dangerous, volatile, and unpredictable. Things that cannot be trusted. Oh, by the way, I'm Ted for the record, he said. I'm Geraldine, I said. Nice name, he said. It suits you. I actually like it. Once the man had actually left, I decided that maybe he wasn't a creep after all. Perhaps I'd been a little hard on him. It did appear that he'd been in the police force, and it would seem that the missing cases that he had investigated had left him flawed and flummoxed. Could there be any truth about a monster in the woods, I wondered? Had he really seen a gargantuan beast in there? Somehow I really doubted it. In my experience, most monsters responsible for murder cases were of the human kind, and as far as I knew, the most treacherous predator in North America was a grizzly bear or a mountain lion. I'm sure he's barking up the wrong tree, I thought to myself. I realised that maybe this prying ex-officer was just keeping a friendly eye on me, which in a strange way was somewhat reassuring and rather endearing, in a funny sort of way, I suppose. That night I was awoken to a very foul smell that literally stank like a decomposing corpse, and smelly trainers rolled all into one, and the smell infused the air with an acrid intensity. It was unlike anything I've ever smelt before, and it was horrifying and so repugnant it was literally causing my nose to burn and my eyes to flood with tears. What the heck is that? I wondered in horror. Suddenly I heard the rustling of leaves and the crunching of twigs beneath heavy, colossal-sized feet. Believe me when I say that these feet belonged to something hefty, and I was in no doubt about that. And whatever this thing was, it was thundering around my campsite like a rhino in a horse box. It was making a hell of a ruckus. It was utterly terrifying. I quickly grabbed my rifle, suddenly feeling pathetically small and inconsequential. My rifle felt so silly, like a kid's toy in my hands. Whatever was outside my tent was quite literally as large as an elephant. Of that I was certain. My heightened senses were literally in overdrive, and yet I was so paralysed by terror that I was seemingly unable to make any decisions. It was like even my rational senses had all but abandoned and deserted me in the very moment in time when every decision I made was of pivotal significance. What should I do? That was the question that floored me. Did I need to run or keep a low profile and remain in my tent and hope with all my heart that this horrible critter would finally leave? I could hear the creature literally yards away from my tent, and the smell emanating from this thing was so offensively ripe. I put on my headlamp and unzipped a small section of my tent. I kid you not, I could see within touching distance of my tent a gargantuan hairy body that was so incredibly tall that all I got to see was the chunky legs and thick waist area that was covered in long flowing dark brown matted hair that literally stunk to high heaven and resembled very ugly dreadlocks. The bottom half of this peculiar creature looked like an old teddy bear that was blown up into the size of a monster, because whatever this thing was, it was elephantine in its size and proportions. As it breathed, it sounded exactly like a horse, and then it began to growl. And finally it started to hammer my tent with its humongous fists that were so powerful they literally caused the entire tent to vibrate under the sheer powerful force. Whatever this ghastly thing was, it wanted to kill me. I was in no doubt about that. What was I going to do? Fear gripped my body like a frozen block of ice that engulfed my entire being with feeling of absolute impending dread. So it was that with clumsy hands I tried to cut open the back of my tent, but in the process I cut myself because my clammy fingers were fumbling so much with anxiety and haste that I could not even cut the tent open in a straight line. I was so disorientated. Finally the back of the tent did open, and I scrambled through it hurriedly, running away as fast as I could towards the wooded area where I took cover behind an oak tree. I wanted to get a quick look at what this thing was that had been trying to attack me. I was clutching my Remington rifle for dear life so very tightly, and I was trying to precariously aim it at whatever this creature actually was. Suddenly I heard powerful gunshots from a rifle infinitely superior to mine, clearly designed to take down very heavy prey. In the light of the pearly crescent moon and the silvery stars, as well as my bright headlamp, and the headlamp worn by Ted, I saw that he was the one that was trying to kill this beast. I had never in all my born days seen a creature like this. Truly it was King Kong-like in girth, stature, weight and height. If I'm being conservative, I would estimate that this thing was 10 foot tall, 1,000 pounds and 5 foot wide. It was so incredibly colossal, and every area of its body just rippled with dense muscle, and the shoulders on this creature were humongous. I noticed the head was shaped like a cone, and the face was remarkably human-like, although there were very definite ape-like influences to the creature's appearance, from the overlong arms to the very distinctive brow ridge. Everything that night was happening way too fast for me to stomach. Every second felt like an entire lifetime on the scale of time. I could see that this critter had only one intention, and it wanted blood, and lots of it. When it saw the ex-police officer, or should I say Ted, aiming at it, I could tell that it was livid and incandescent with rage. The only way I can describe this critter's behaviour was like that of a very angry rabid dog, or an elephant in musk. Its behaviour was irrational, driven and powered by an intention to kill, almost like testosterone-driven. And nothing else mattered, and common sense did not prevail, nor any sense of self-preservation. It was prepared to fight to the death, and if the assault of bullets was anything to go by, the critter became even more irate. I could tell that a couple of bullets had actually hit him in the shoulders, but had appeared not to incapacitate him in the slightest, but fueled him with an even greater desire to fight back with deadly intent. Before I knew it, the creature grabbed the gun and threw it into the trees, and then he took hold of poor Ted and whirled him in the air like a pizza several times, catching him like a rag doll. And then he finally snapped Ted's neck and decapitated him like a chicken. I could barely believe what I was actually seeing with my eyes. I just knew that if I shot at the creature, that I would end up exactly like Ted in his predicament. I had no idea what to do, so I decided I would shimmy up a tree and hide up there in the branches. I was athletic, agile and slight, and I had mastered the art of tree climbing from a very young age, and so I shimmied up the tree and lay hidden in the branches for the rest of the night, waiting for the full light of the morning to arrive. I couldn't see anything, but I'd heard enough. I could hear grunting, sniffing and stampeding over my campsite, and then I heard the creature thundering through the forest, and he sounded exactly like a herd of rhinos. It was horrifying. In the morning I awoke to find my campsite in a total mess, and I could see my tent had been shredded up and was scattered everywhere like pieces of confetti. I could see that all my items had been flung absolutely everywhere, and it looked like hell and damnation had broken loose. Some of my garments were lying over bushes, and pots were scattered surreptitiously all over the ground. Suddenly I heard the sound of a woman sobbing. She was cradling Ted's detached head all in her arms like a ball, and I noticed that his eyes were missing from his corpse, as if they'd been purposely removed. "Who does this?" she sobbed. "What kind of a monster? It's even removed his eyes." To cut a long story short, this kindly woman was indeed Ted's wife, and she told me that all his life in the force, Ted had been very bothered by missing people in the area, and was hell-bent on resolving these curious cases. When he actually caught me camping out in the woods, he was very concerned for my safety, because he had seen that humanoid ape in the woods before, and he believed that this creature was violent and aggressive and incredibly dangerous, and could potentially be behind some of these missing cases. When he saw me solo camping, he believed I was in grievous danger, so he was patrolling the place at night, unbeknown to me, while I was camping to ensure my safety. As you can imagine, I felt responsible for Ted's death, but his wife reassured me that Ted would have not had it any other way. I suggested that we went to the police together to file a report, but Ted's wife told me to go home and to get lots of rest. She reassured me that she would be the one filing the report, but she was never going to mention anything about that humanoid ape because no one would ever believe us. So she was going to register Ted's death as a bear attack. I immediately returned home to the delight of my parents, who didn't ask me any awkward questions because they were too delighted to have me back. I decided to visit my best friend Jane's mother and ask her exactly how long I did have to live, because if I only had weeks left, I needed to know about it, and I needed to know about it now. Mrs. Robinson, I said, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm going to say it as it is, and I want an honest answer from you. Please tell me, how long have I got to live? It's very important that I know the facts. You must tell me. Jane's mother looked at me in amazement. I'm a psychic, dear. I'm not God. How could I possibly know how long you've got left to live? That's not up to me. But I stammered, I heard you at Jane's birthday party discussing that I didn't have long to live. I know, I heard you. You clearly told your friend. You said poor Geraldine hasn't got long and it's going to be very hard for Jane to lose her best friend. Geraldine, dear, was not you. Geraldine was Jane's gerbil. Don't you remember she named it after you? She considered Geraldine one of her best furry friends. He only got to live a month after that party, bless him. So I'm not dying, I asked in amazement. As far as I know, dear, no, you're not. So there you are. That's my story. I did end up going to university and getting a degree, but I'm now a grief counsellor, actually helping people with dealing with tragic and disastrous events, because I'm quite good at that by now. I'm also happily married with 2 children, but believing I was living on borrowed time for so long enabled me to grab life with both hands and enjoy every moment, and I still live by that today. All these years later, in about the late 2000s, I discovered that the animal that killed Ted was in fact a Bigfoot. Whether this creature was responsible for other missing cases, I am not entirely sure, but this creature was incredibly dangerous. But as with all these creatures, some of these Bigfoots are good and others are bad. And that creature that I encountered, well, he was most certainly the latter. So there you are. That's my story. I just want to thank you so much for that amazing story, Geraldine. That was just phenomenal. Oh, wow. I mean, I cannot believe what an incredible encounter you had, and how thinking that you didn't have long to live made you live every day to its fullest. I think that's a lesson for all of us. Until next time, goodbye and good night.